Welcome to Aging Gracefully. I want you to live a long, healthy life without regrets. And today, we have a very special topic and a very special person here. Lisa Weitzman from Benjamin Rose Institute on Aging. Thank you for coming. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Our special topic today is about caregiving. And I know I've had this experience, and probably everyone I know has somehow been a caregiver at some point in time, or are looking at it in their future potentially. So I know you have some great information, and we're going to get right into it. But before we do, may I ask how old you are?
I am 55.
All right, 55 years old, and you have how many children?
And I have 5 children.
Which totally surprised me, yes. So you have a very busy life.
I do.
And at Benjamin Rose, I remember you saying this is really like a second career for you.
Correct. So I started off doing something very different, took time off to be with my children, and then came back fully passionate about social justice and social work.
Mm-hmm. So I love what you're doing right now. Tell me about this program, and let's continue from there. We'll talk about then the problems caregivers go through and some of the solutions you have.
Wonderful. So our program is called BRI Care Consultation, and it's a program that's really focused on family caregivers of older loved ones. We recognize from conversations with family caregivers, we've been working on this project now for 20 years, and they've been telling us that so much of the energy, particularly in the healthcare world and in the supportive services world, focuses on the person with the illness. But the person who's really bearing as much of this responsibility for caring is that person at home, that family or friend caregiver. And so our program, BRI Care Consultation, is meant to support that family caregiver. So we do it in 4 ways. We help them to connect to resources in the community. We help them to find educational information to help them understand what is the disease process that their loved one is living with. What is it going to look like for them? How do they handle caregiver stress? How do they have a conversation with their doctor? So we work with them in lots of different ways. We also work with them to help expand their network of people who are involved in supporting them. And most importantly, we provide emotional support for family caregivers all throughout this caregiving journey.
Love it. So let's break this down just a little bit.
Okay.
Like how we would define a caregiver. I'll maybe give some examples from people I know. I know people whose spouse has had a stroke and they're no longer totally independent. They end up helping them with their daily activities. But it might also be someone who's caring for their mother or their father, or helping their mother care for the father, or vice versa. In my particular case, I had an aunt come live with me. She was supposed to live for weeks, but 10 months later, she did pass. But that amount of time, I had given up my master bedroom, and because it was supposed to be a short time. Right. I totally understand the experience of what it's like and the amount of stress and wondering what happens next. I kind of found this list of some of the things that caregivers go through that maybe people don't always realize. I think when you're in the muck, right?
Right, exactly.
You just don't know. So what happens to the budget, for one thing? This is like all of a sudden you might be thinking you've got one plan for your future and you're working down that.
Right, and I think that's one of the great challenges of caregiving, and where a lot of what we call the ambiguous grief comes from, right? Where let's say it's you and your spouse, and you have these wonderful plans for what retirement is going to look like, and you've worked so hard and saved so long for these beautiful retirement years. And then one of you becomes chronically ill. And so not only do you lose the ability to go on these trips because both partners aren't able, but then all the resources that you were going to devote to these wonderful retirement years are suddenly drained by your caregiving expenses. So without a doubt, it's a huge cost that people don't necessarily think about right off the top of their head.
Yes. And then also with the cost, it can affect, let's say, the caregiver is working still.
Right.
And it has a big impact on the hours that they're working. They may not be able to work full-time anymore or have to change days. And they might be working around a schedule of a paid caregiver coming into the home.
Right. Or what happens when mom calls in the middle of a very important meeting and you're with your boss, right? So, and this is actually an issue that's near and dear to our heart at Benjamin Rose, is how do we support working caregivers and how do we educate employers about the cost to them as a company and the cost to their employees for not supporting people who are trying to quote unquote balance working and caring for older loved ones, and then maybe even caring for their own immediate family as well.
Right. Then another thing, when it affects the budget, I've seen this before also, where maybe someone knows they need to get something fixed in the house, but they can't attend to that because all the money is going into the other responsibilities right now. Utilities might fall behind, even their own clothing or personal care. Well, I don't have the money to get my hair cut right now. Or I'll get shoes next month. And then there's the problem with the adult children. And while we were going to help them with college, we were on that road, but all of a sudden everything changes.
Right. I think a challenge of that too is that, particularly when you talk about the caregiver taking care of him or herself, I think so often today we still equate self-care with being selfish. And we don't realize that for caregivers, if they don't take care of themselves first, they're never going to be able to continue to care for the person for whom they're caring. This is obviously a marathon. This is not a sprint. And so that's part of our work, is to encourage caregivers to take care of themselves, even when it seems so hard to juggle all those different buckets of responsibility.
And you and I were talking on the phone just recently, and you said how the responsibilities kind of get into the relationship, like, well, it was just husband and wife, but now that one is a caregiver, it's another area
Right.
where...
And so often, unfortunately, caregivers are placed in positions where they're doing a lot of really medical services for their loved one, for which they're, number one, not trained to do, so it's scary. But number two, it really crosses over the sanctity of that relationship. And I think that's so hard for caregivers to lose the sanctity of their marriage or to lose the sanctity of that child-parent relationship that they had treasured and valued. And so part of our program is to help put those other supports in place so that we can restore that relationship to something similar to what it might have been before.
Good. I love this. Let's continuing down here too. Preventive care, I've definitely heard this. I remember someone recently saying, well, I really know it's time for me to get my colonoscopy, but oh my gosh, they'll knock me out for that and I'd be out for a day, and I can't do that. I can't leave him.
Right.
Things like that. So they'll be putting that off. Dental care is another one. Well, I usually get my teeth cleaned every 6 months, but it can wait. So caregivers start putting things off. And I think often they just don't even realize, because it's a slow road.
Right, exactly. And I think the interesting ramification of that we see is that the health cost to the person who's providing the care, sometimes that cost, so to speak, can last 3 years after the person for whom they've caring has passed away, because through the stress of caregiving and then through the neglect of their own care, because, as you say, time has gotten away or the capacity to find time for yourself has disappeared, caregivers' own health really suffers. And often, unfortunately, we find caregivers who pass away before their loved ones, even if they hadn't been ill before this whole caregiving journey had begun.
Well, there's also the loss of sleep.
Right.
Especially if your spouse or your parent, maybe it's Alzheimer's or dementia, and they're wandering, and
right.
Maybe you have to get up because the medication has to be administered at 2 in the morning, right. And so many things. So the first thing I wanted to clarify is, for those watching and people who are caring for a loved one, that I really want them to know that you honor that this is really a serious problem, that they're not making too much of it. that really being a caregiver is hard. It is really hard.
Yep.
And then your program helps with so many aspects. So let's talk about like what happens now. I'm a caregiver and I'm going to make a phone call to
Yep.
BRI Care Consultation.
Yeah. And let's take a step back even before that, because I think there's so many people who are providing this type of support for their loved ones and they don't even identify themselves as a caregiver. They might say, this is my job, or this is my spouse, so this is just what I do, or this is my dad, and so this is just what I do. So we're looking to help people who may be in a role of just caring about somebody who's older, regardless of whether they call themselves officially the caregiver. So when that person who's in that role decides, you know what, I really could use some help. Usually it's when they're feeling overwhelmed. Usually it's when they're feeling like there's nobody else who's carrying this responsibility besides themselves. And often it's when there's a crisis in the household, and so they call us. The wonderful thing about when they call us is that from the moment that they get somebody on the phone, that will be their person that they'll work with for the entire time they're involved with our program. So our program is delivered in 3-month subscriptions, and families can enroll in as many subscriptions as they want. But throughout every 3-month period, they will always work with the same person. It's not a 1-800 number that they would be calling. So there's that wonderful piece about it. And from that first conversation, we're going to help families start to resolve the problem that made them call us in the first place. So we're not going to go through days of assessments trying to understand what's going on. We have a program, we're going to ask lots of questions, but it's really about the conversations. How do we support you with where you are and what you want to focus on right now? The only thing for you that would in essence supersede your priorities if there's a real safety concern in the house. That we need to take care of first, but beyond that, it's very much driven by what are the priorities of the caregiver and how can we support that caregiver. So it might be about connecting the caregiver to a resource, and it might be about helping that caregiver have a difficult conversation with mom or dad. Maybe it's about helping the caregiver prepare to talk to a doctor, and the caregiver doesn't know how to have that conversation. We're not going to have the conversation for the caregiver, but we're going to empower that caregiver to feel like he or she has control back of his or her own life and can have these conversations alone.
This is wonderful. So it's great that they have a bond and they don't have to try to reconnect or give their information over and over again to someone new on the phone, because that would be frustrating in itself. Now, is this program just local?
No, so the beautiful thing about the program is it's delivered only via telephone and email. So the advantage of that is that it can be delivered anywhere in the country, and it can be delivered for that reason to people who may not be living in the same city as their loved one. So let's say you are a caregiver and you're living in California and your mother lives in Southern Ohio. We can still work with you and help to support you. So people say, well, how can you begin to help me with resources in a community that you don't live in? And so we've developed a whole roadmap for how we go into new communities and figure out where are the best resources for families, because needs tend to be pretty similar. It's about finding that best provider. But what we found is that after that first 1 or 2 phone calls that are very much about connecting to resources, it's much more about that emotional support. Having that person, the caregiver, can be totally honest with, that they can say, I don't really want to be doing this, and I feel really guilty for feeling this way. And it's okay to have those emotions.
And wouldn't you say that on their own, each person is kind of like reinventing the wheel over and over again? They've never been through this. They don't have the right person to ask necessarily. So they're thinking, I don't know what the resources are. And they might be online, doing the work, trying to figure this out. Your program, you've got it all for them. It's a one-stop shop that way.
And that's the beauty of it, right? You don't have to figure out what types of needs even your mom or dad might have or your loved one might have. You can call us. You don't even need to know what you don't know, or you don't even need to know what you should be knowing. And we'll be able to guide you with one phone number to us to all and connect you to all the resources in the community that you would need to take advantage of. And then in terms of the financing piece, helping people to understand that there are a lot of programs out there that will help support people who are providing care and support people with illnesses. It's hard to figure out if you're on the outside how to connect to them, but that's another thing that we can offer, is that ability to connect people, to help them structure their finances in ways so they can continue to care for their loved one and take that trip that they've always wanted to take.
I love the way this fits into living a long, healthy life without regrets.
Yep.
Right? Because we always do have to take care of ourselves first. We have to love ourselves enough, take care of ourselves so we can be there for our loved ones. So tell me about eligibility. So we know it can be anyone in the country.
Right.
And do they have to be a certain age?
So we like to say that the older adult, or the person that the older adult with the illness is at least 55 years of age. The age of the caregiver is not important, but we can be flexible on that. And we're also now starting to work with families where the older adult is actually the caregiver for an adult child with developmental disabilities. And so perhaps the person with the disability is 43, and that's okay as well. So we're pretty flexible. We just don't work with families who are caregivers of younger children.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is a situation that I've seen as well. People my age who still are caring for their own children because of their special needs.
Exactly. And the key really is, for any of these situations, right, it's about putting those plans in place. How do we go from living crisis to crisis to saying, all right, I've lived through this crisis, how do I put a plan in place for care so even though I may not eliminate them all, I can soften the blows?
Well, I am so grateful that you're here. I'm so grateful for this program because, you know, I teach exercise, fitness classes, yoga, and the people that I'm with daily are between, say, 50 and 100 years old. And this is a conversation that is pretty much a daily conversation in my world, who we're taking care of and how they're doing. And someone might say, I couldn't come last week, you know, because my husband wasn't doing so well.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So I'm so grateful for this program and to have learned about it. And I really would like our viewers to share this with the other people as well, so we really get this information out. So, well, I think it's about time for our ageless advice. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, Lisa. All right, so I know you have seen an awful lot in your years of working with so many people, and beautiful people, for sure. What would you say is the most beautiful thing that you've seen working with people?
So I think there's a beauty to older adults. There's a beauty in their capacity to connect with other people, their ability to be present in the moment. And particularly, I think one of the most beautiful things I've seen are the older adults who will say to me, I may not have checked every item off my bucket list, but I have no regrets. And so no matter when my life ends, I know that I have lived a fulfilling life and made a difference simply by living my life. And those are the people who are able to cherish every day, who recognize that, and they've really taught me to embrace the idea that life is a gift, and that we may never be able to control how many days we are given, but we can certainly control the quality of how we live those days. And so that's a lesson that I carry with me on a daily basis.
How inspiring. So you then have seen people who seem to have great meaning and purpose in their life. Do you suggest that that ties in with their happiness?
Without a doubt. So I firmly believe that happiness is a choice, and that we can look at our older years and we can focus on all that we have lost, and we can look at it from a very medical perspective of these are things that are broken that somehow we need to fix. But we can also choose to look at it very differently, and we can choose to look at it by how do we find meaning and purpose in our lives? It's so important for us when we're younger, and even though our capabilities may look different, we still have the capacity to live meaningful lives full of purpose on a daily basis. And I think that is the choice people make. And when they do, they're certainly much happier.
I've seen that myself. Those who even make phone calls, who write letters, who do anything they can towards someone else's happiness,
Right.
are the ones who seem to be very happy.
Without a doubt.
And then we did talk too, it doesn't have to be a person.
No, it could be your favorite pet, and for some older adults, it might even be a plant. That they understand if I don't get up and water that plant may not survive. That plant needs me, and in that very basic, simple moment, that person's life has meaning.
That's wonderful. Last question, Lisa. What is your secret to aging gracefully?
So many ideas around this. I think one is having the wisdom to appreciate how beautiful the aging process is, how much we've gained from living these long, wonderful years, and what we've learned as a result of them, and what we have to share as a result of them. I think another secret to it is to practice gratitude. Again, to be so grateful for the days that we're given. To embrace our creativity that we all have within us, to redefine ourselves as we age, and continue to explore new parts of ourselves that we might not have had the time or the capability of exploring when we were younger. But for me, those are the things that really, to embrace this journey of aging, right? Rather than to shun it. We're so often in media told to repel it or deny it, but how do we embrace it and celebrate it? And I think if we can get ourselves to that place, we'll all be able to we'll find that secret to aging gracefully.
I love it. Yes. Well, thank you so much for being here. This is a topic that is very dear to me, and we may have to have a part 2 another day.
That would be wonderful. I'd be glad to come back.
Expand into it a lot deeper yet. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
And to my viewers, thank you so much for being with us today. Please do share this information, because I know there are so many people who need this. And if you haven't been to my website yet, please go to www.aginggracefully.tv, where you can watch this interview or other ones over and over again. And there's quick to read articles and inspiring stories I'm sure you'll enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you.